Anyway, we're getting sidetracked. Let's get back on track. Slide 1, slide 2. Right, slide 2. And how many people have we got here today? We've got 7 people in the class today. By my reckoning, there are 14 in the cohort, in other words, in the whole group. And looking down the list of names here, folks, most of you come to most classes. So thank you, congratulations, well done, you're doing the right thing. So my next comment is going to apply to all of those people, hopefully, who are catching up with this recording and working through it in their own time. But it's so important that you come to class. And as you know, there was an assessment last week, and I had a quick look at some of them. And I also had some very last minute tutorials, like a day before, like a few hours before, with students asking me questions and expecting me to read stuff within like a few hours of submission time. And that's no good, folks. It's not good for you. It's not good for me. It's not good for life in general. So my next minute or so goes out to typically for all of those people who can't make it. And I understand that people have got issues, that you've got broadband problems, you've got to work, you've got family to look after. I understand all that. But can everybody between now and the end of term do everything they can to come to the workshops? Because I realise, looking down the list of students here and the students in general, I realise that for some of you, quite a lot of you, I've not seen any of your work at all. And the whole point of the workshops is that you can make all your mistakes without getting assessed. Because if you just do the assessments, then you're setting yourself up for disappointment because you've had no feedback on your work whatsoever. So can I just appeal to everybody, it makes sense from every respect, from every angle. It's value for money, if you want to think about it that way. So you're paying for workshops, but you don't use them. It's like gym memberships, and we know how wasteful they can be, right? And it also means you get feedback, your writing improves, you'll probably score higher marks, and you will ultimately be happier. And that's what life's all about, isn't it? Trying to achieve maximum levels of contentment. That's what a lot of people think it is. So, and you'll get that if you come to the workshops. You know, the classes are one thing, the lectures like today are one thing, the workshops are another. But it suddenly hit me last week that at least half of the class, I've not seen anything, no work from you at all. No work at all. And my door has been open, you know, so... And if you're having problems for whatever reason, get in touch with me. But it just worries me when people don't show up at all and you never hear from them until the very last minute. And the second please on slide number 2 is please read and follow the brief. And I had 3 email exchanges last week with students. Sorry, 2 email exchanges and 1 interaction, you know, verbally on Zoom. And for those 3 people, it was apparent that they had not even read the brief. And it was too late in the day for them to change their submission. And this is the problem. If you leave it until the last minute and don't read the brief and submit it, and I'm not being mean here, you're probably going to get a low mark. And you'll probably get stressed out. And you probably think that I'm awful. And you might even complain about me. Who knows? But essentially, it's your responsibility, folks, to read the brief. So I'm not going to say who these people are, but there were at least 3 people. I've not read everybody's submission, not yet. But remember what you had to do, okay? It says in the brief, you can't do the same subjects for assessment 2 as you did for assessment 1. So if you did 2 podcasts and 1 TV for assessment 1, you cannot do podcasts and TV for assessment 2, right? I'll say that again. Whatever you did for assessment 1, you can't do it again for assessment 2. You can't use the same media, essentially. So TV, video, streaming is one media. So you're allowed to do either one of those or 2 of those for assessment 1, and then either 1 and 2 podcast or music or whatever. Then for assessment 2, you have to do something different. So, and one of the reasons that I designed it like this is I'm trying to expand your horizons. So I often find, for example, with young students that they love streaming, they love Netflix. They might like the occasional podcast, but they don't really do music, or sometimes they're just music and they don't do podcasts. But I'm trying to get you to expand your horizons, encouraging you and opening doors and enlightening you. And that's kind of what teaching's all about in my mind. You know, is pushing the comfort zone and going beyond what you normally and naturally do. You know, so that's the reason we've done it. So for assessment 2, really important, and I don't know you at all because we've not really had tutorials or discussions, but I'm hoping that you all love film and books. Because what I suggest you do for assessment 2, you've got 2 800-word reviews to write, longer than the ones in assessment 1. So they lend themselves better to longer, more detailed, more complex pieces of culture. And books and film typically are longer, more detailed and complex piece of structure. It's very difficult to write an 800-word review of a song, for example, or a TV show, because a lot of TV shows don't really have that much depth and that much complexity. Some do, but most don't. So please, everybody, just finishing off slide 2, and this goes out particularly for about those 7 people who are not here today. You between now and the end of the term, you really must come to the workshops and catch up with the lectures online if you can't make it in real life. But because I really do worry, because there's, like I said, there's about half of the class I've not seen any work from you at all. I've got no idea what you like, what you dislike, what you struggle with, what you're good at. No idea. And so if you just do an assessment based on, you know, not reading the brief, you are setting yourself up for trouble. Anyway, let's move on. Let's move on to slide 3, and I'll have a drink of water. So what we're going to do today is talk about book and film reviews. Now, I put them together for one reason, because in many ways, books and films, believe it or not, they're quite similar, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So in terms of books, you have a huge choice that can go all the way back to the Middle Ages when books were first invented. I guess you could even do a book review of the Bible if you wanted to. That was written, obviously, a couple of thousand years ago. Or even books before that, because there were books. No, but don't do a Bible. It would be original, but not, Agnes. In one way it would be original, but in another way it wouldn't be original, because it's the most popular book in the world. So please avoid the Bible or the Quran or any other holy book for that matter. Okay, so books. So you got novels, stories, you know, Charles Dickens novels, the Bronte sisters, George Orwell novels, Harry Potter, Zadie Smith, all of those modern novelists, novels, stories. You can also do factual books, and I read a lot of factual books for my job. I read books about economics and history and politics and or media and all that sort of stuff. So you can do a factual book, a textbook you could do a review of, for example. Not that it would be that interesting. Oh, it might be, you never know. And biographies. So you got biographies and autobiographies. Biographies, a story of somebody's life, but not the person whose life it is. An autobiography is that person writing about themselves. Often, if it's a footballer or a soap star or a singer, the autobiography is often ghost written. You may have heard that expression, ghost written, by a journalist. Quite often, because footballers, and I used to be one, so I can be rude about footballers. But footballers typically, they kind of stop their schooling around about the age of 14, 15. There was a guy at my school who went on to become a professional, and we never saw him after the age of 14, 15. He was a very bright lad, actually, but his whole life from 14, 15 onwards was football, football, football. So sports people, they don't typically have a lot of schooling. So they do tend to employ somebody to write their story for them. Personally, I find biographies far more interesting than autobiographies. The reason is that if you're writing your own book about your own life, you're going to be very selective by what goes into it. And you're going to take all the embarrassing and bad stuff out, aren't you, typically? Biographies are not like that, and they are, in my experience, much more interesting. So you've got choice: novels, factual, biographies, autobiographies. Huge choice, huge choice. The point in the blue oval, your choice does not have to be a new release. So you can do something from the 19th century. So if you love Jane Austen, for example, as an author, you can do a review of a Jane Austen book. Don't forget, however, originality. So if it's an absolute classic book like Pride and Prejudice or something like that, it's not that original, really. I would rather read about a book I've never heard of, a great book I've never heard of. Same applies to film. Huge choice. You got movies, so blockbuster movies. You know, things like the superhero movies, rom-coms, war movies, all of those different genres. The specification here, folks, is because there's sometimes a fine line between film, what constitutes a film, and what constitutes a TV program. So what I'm talking about is what's called feature length. You may see that expression, feature length film. Feature length typically is 80, 90 minutes or above. So a 1 minute program is not really considered a film. It might be. There are short films, but generally speaking, we're talking feature length here. So watch out on Netflix, Amazon Prime for feature length movies. So don't do box sets. Box sets are not film. I mean, they are filmed, but they're not what you call a movie. And don't do series. The other thing that you can do, and I know that some of you in the class have got 2 or more languages, give us a foreign language film. You know, so if your mother tongue, if your first language is Polish, tell us about a Polish film. Obviously, you're going to have to kind of translate and contextualise and explain it a bit more. Maybe it involves something about Polish culture that is quite different to British culture. But there's no reason you shouldn't do it. Do a film in Arabic. There have been some great Arabic language films. And it frustrates me that I don't have the patience often to sit down and watch them. Because you have to read the subtitles, which can be, you know, if it's a fast-paced movie, it can be quite difficult to keep up with the subtitles and other context that you might miss out on. So book and film, you've got a huge choice, folks. I would strongly suggest that you do one of each for assessment 2. Do 1 book and 1 film. 1 book and 1 film. Slide 4. Slide 4. So what I'm going to look at here is compare 2 things. Novels, I've put that in orange. It's a different colour to movies. Novels and movies. So I'm going to compare or do together, I'm going to do novels. So these are stories. Stories, you know, like Harry Potter stories, like David Copperfield by Charles Dickens, like Pride and Prejudice by Jane Austen, or whatever it might be. So these are stories. So they are fiction. They are fiction. They are stories about people doing things. Quite often in, you know, quite, what you might say, quite far out conceptions. You know, some of the stuff I've read, like Brave New World, if you've read that. Yeah, that's a futuristic novel. So you can do futuristic novels or magic novels or what, or vampire novels, I guess. They were big a few years ago, weren't they? So novels and movies, they are obviously different media. One's written and you read it, and the other is visual and audio. So you watch it and hear it, but they are actually very, very similar. So if you have a think about it, on the left-hand side, this is how you might start thinking about how to describe a novel or a movie. Okay, so you've got the genre. So is it a love story? Is it a buddy movie? Is it a war movie? Is it a revenge movie? You know, is it a sort of futuristic? Dystopian is another word that is used. A dystopian is like a future world that is really bad, you know, like 1984, George Orwell. So that's the genre. So you need to tell us what the genre is. And there are also subgenres, aren't there? So within war movies, it depends on the war. It could be American Civil War, it could be Vietnam War, it could be War on Terror, you know. So you need to tell us about the plot. So what is the story? The classic plot, the very simple one which gets recycled and reused across all cultures, is boy meets girl, boy loses girl, boy gets girl back. You know, think of Shakespeare. Yes, you can, Agnes. Private screening to a film that's yet to be released, so long as it ticks all the other boxes, Agnes. So that's the plot. So you need to describe the plot. Some plots are really complicated, aren't they? Some of them really, really simple. I'm thinking now Saving Private Ryan. So the plot there was that a platoon of soldiers were sent to rescue Private Ryan because he was the only member of that family who had not yet been killed in World War II, and it was important for propaganda reasons that not all of the boys of the Ryan family got killed. That's the plot of the film. But there's also a subplot within Saving Private Ryan. So the characters interact, and some of them have a mission that they don't agree with. Others have got an attitude, a pacifist attitude or whatever it might. So within a platoon, a team of soldiers, there were all those different tensions, different characters, different interactions. Indeed, the next point, characters, you can talk about the characters. You can talk about Harry Potter and all of his mates and the teachers. And I don't know Harry Potter, so I don't know why I've gone down that track. But talk about the main characters in the book. And also, the key point is that this applies to movies, right? So the genre of film, the genre of novel, the plot of film, the plot of the novel, the subplot of the film, the subplot of the novel. The dialogue is really indicative of a book. Sometimes dialogue is very natural and very quick and very believable, isn't it? That's the whole point, isn't it? About dialogue, it needs to be, even though we know it's a fiction. This is a movie which is not true, not real, and so is the book. The dialogue still needs to be human. It still needs to be believable. And what about the atmosphere of the film or the book? It could be, people say, it's a very dark movie, or it was a very sort of soft focus movie, or the colours were really bright, like psychedelic, like a dreamy sort of sequence within movies. And also the final point, particularly for some of the, sort of classic movies, academics, some of my colleagues in the department, they are actually academics in film. They study film as a profession. And I've had numerous conversations with, in fact, one of my neighbours when I lived in southwest London, Stacey, she was a professor of film. I remember coming in on the train with her once, and we had a fascinating discussion about the deeper meaning of a film that I was very fond of, called The Blues Brothers. You may have heard of it. And The Blues Brothers is basically two guys who tried to get $5,000 together to save the orphanage that they attended when they were kids. But it's a fascinating, and on the surface it's just a car chase and music movie. But Stacey was telling me about all the different elements to the Blues Brothers that actually gave it much deeper meaning. It was really fascinating. So films do or can have deeper meaning. Not all films do, folks. Don't your Vin Diesel films and your Sylvester Stallone films and all that. It's arguable whether they do have any deeper meaning, but even saying that, sometimes they do. The Rambo films of the 80s, I've heard people say that they are, they reflect the geopolitical policy of America at the time. And if you think about it, it's Sylvester Stallone with a machine gun going over to Afghanistan and saving the world. I mean, it's almost like the personification of American foreign policy. So think about the meaning of the film and the book as well. Some of the differences on the right hand side, obviously movies are visual, so you need to talk about the visuals, and movie companies spend an enormous amount of money getting the visuals right and spending money on film sets, and increasingly, third point, on special effects and CGI. So there's a big difference clearly there. I don't know that film, Annabelle. I guess it's Spanish, judging by it. And yeah, obviously, Annabelle, I think you've got languages, right? You speak Spanish, I think, and Greek. I can't remember. But all of you, if any of you've got languages, think about them, because that opens. It's a real advantage to have a language, because it opens so many doors for you. So going back to my list of differences, movies are visual. So clearly, if you're describing a book, you have to be more descriptive. And you have to use your imagination more, which is why books are really, in my opinion, the ultimate media. The photography of the film, it can be absolutely breathtakingly beautiful, especially when you see it on a large screen. I'm thinking here about Western movies. There was one many years ago called Dances with Wolves, Kevin Costner, and the scenery in the Midwest of America for that was quite exceptional. Obviously, think about the superhero movies as well. They're pretty exceptional visually, but that's 99% of that, I think, these days is CGI. And others have notable music, don't they? A musical soundtrack. I'm thinking here something like Reservoir Dogs or Pulp Fiction. They've got very distinctive musical backtrack. Or Blues Brothers, one of my favourite movies, and a big sound as well. So there are differences between movies and books. But there are plenty of similarities on the left. On the similarities on the left. So we're going to do books and films together here. So general guidance, slide 5. And this comes back to my general guidance in previous weeks. So there is general guidance for all reviews, but I've just fine-tuned this for film and book. First point, you need to assume your reader has never seen the movie. And even, believe it or not, folks, I've never seen Star Wars. I've never seen the Harry Potter movies. I've never seen all of those animation, those Disney Pixar stuff like Bug's Life or whatever it's called. I've not seen all of those. So you need a sentence in there to include people like me. And I'm in a minority, I realise that, but that's what inclusivity is all about. You include people who would not normally know what you're talking about. So you need a very brief description of what it's about early in your article. Also, you need to position the movie or book in a genre. You need to tell us war, superhero, rom-com, whatever it is. So you can do all that very briefly. Second point, your article needs to cover the plot and the subplot without giving away the ending. So this is the classic spoiler alert. You need to avoid that. And there are ways of doing that. You can just be vague. You can talk about the story. Because a lot of films, they are about a mission, aren't they? They're on a mission to do something. They're on a mission of revenge, a mission of compassion. You've got to save somebody, or you've got to build something, or you've got to, destroy something, or whatever it might be. Third point, you need to tell us about the main characters. What are their defining characteristics? So think Daniel Craig in James Bond. How would you describe him? He doesn't laugh a lot, does he? He's pretty serious. He's pretty sinister. He's pretty, he doesn't say very much. Think about how the characters interact. Are they allies or enemies, for example? Typically, novels and books, they have what's called a protagonist. Incidentally, the word protagonist, you might want to make a note of this, very useful word, protagonist. What it actually means is literally the singular lead person. So really, you can't have two protagonists. You can have a double act, or you can have a partnership, but there's only one protagonist. So Daniel Craig plays the protagonist. Harry Potter is the protagonist. Jane Eyre is the protagonist. Whatever it might be. So characters, how do they interact? Are they allies or enemies? You'll notice that authors and filmmakers, they typically, if there's a team, if there's a group, Fantastic Four, classic example, they all do something exceptionally well, don't they? Each of them have a particular skill or talent, and they've also got their own individual characters. Actually, superhero movies are a really good example of point number 3 and point number 4 here. The next point is really useful, particularly if you're doing a foreign language one, folks. So Annabelle and Agnes, if you're thinking foreign language films, what does it compare to? So if you're thinking about a film in Spanish, Annabelle, for example, I'm guessing it's Spanish you're talking about here, compare it to an English film that we might know and love, or an American film. And likewise, if it is an American or English film and it's quite obscure, then compare it to something else. Filmmakers don't like it when you do that, but it's important in our mind as viewers and as readers to know what we're buying here. What are we consuming? It's useful because it gives the reader a point of reference. Point 6. You need to convey the impact of the film or book on the reader or viewer. Does it have twists and turns, for example, like a murder mystery? A whodunit, as they're often called, a detective novel. Does the book take you down one particular street and then all of a sudden you realise it's a dead end and the real killer is going down another street? So talk about the twists and turns. What emotions does it generate? Does it have you? Does it make you cry? Does it make you laugh? Does it make you angry? Does it intrigue you? And a good book and a good movie should at least elicit some sort of emotional reaction. Is it boring at times? And boring isn't necessarily a bad thing, folks. And some films, books are in places. It's just the contrast. It's the downtime before the excitement begins. And if you think about it, life at times is pretty same old, isn't it? Sitting through one of my classes, hopefully that's not totally boring, but I do sort of say the same things over and over, don't I? So is it boring? But if a film obviously is too boring, I watched a film, what was it, last week, 2 weeks ago? Oh, it was the Al Pacino film. I don't know whether you saw it, Carlito's Way, and I kind of like Al Pacino. I kind of like a bit of a gangster movie. And it was bizarre because I got like 3/4 of the way through it and then I got really bored. Usually I get bored after about 20 minutes. I give it 20 minutes, half an hour, and if it's boring, I watch something else. But somehow I got 3/4 of the way through it. So if I was doing a review of Carlito's Way, I'd mention that, because that was incredibly indicative of that movie. It was great acting, great dialogue, good story, but 3/4 of the way through, it's like, this is actually wasting my time now, which is surprising, but it makes for a good review. Point number 7, do not try to condense the whole story into 800 words. Be selective. And like I said before, folks, don't just say this happened, then that happened, then this happened, then that happened. And that's just like a concise synopsis of the whole story. We need the big picture. We need the big picture. We don't need every twist and turn. We just need the general plot and how it progresses and dialogue and what's it like. You're describing the experience. As always, point 8, don't over-describe. Leave room for evaluation. So don't just describe what happened and who said what. You need to tell us about whether it is any good or not. And on that basis, use a variety of evaluative techniques. Remember what we did about similes, adjectives, your own responses, etc. And as always with reviews, point number 10, make sure it has a gripping introduction and a compelling last paragraph. And again, folks, when I had a quick look at your work last week, the assessments, the people who came to workshops, they've had a go at introductions and gripping last paragraphs. People who don't come to workshops, they've never practiced them. So their reviews tend not to have gripping introductions and compelling last paragraphs. Another good reason to come to the workshops. Anyway, enough from me for a moment. Slide number 6. You've got 2 very short reviews there from the Week magazine. These are 2 movies from last year, Onward and Escape from Pretoria. They're about 200 words each, so I'll give you 5 minutes to read them and let's discuss them. So if you should be okay, just zoom in on the slide and you'll be able to read them. So 5 minutes.
I'm not too I mean, I think they were both really like they gave me a lot of information in such small little write-ups. They both kind of compared like the film and the plot to something that we can relate it to.
Oh, what was that? What was it? I haven't read them for a while. Tell us what which film was compared to which film, Millie?
So in the second one, he compared it to Shawshank Redemption, but in like a funny way, saying like, if because it's about the key or whatever escaping from prison, then he said, if that's your favourite part of it, like digging the tunnel, then you'll love the film. So basically, like taking the, like a bit of the mix with that. And then the first one kind of just compared it to like saying like the film was like doing Pixar was like doing what Pixar does best, and we all know like how emotional like they can be like for like cartoons and stuff. I don't know. But I think Millie, let me ask you, Millie, are you a fan of Pixar movies or escape movies? Are either of those your sort of thing? To be honest, like Pixar, I haven't really before like in my family we've never really been a cartoony family, but recently I've like started watching like Soul and Disney Pixar and stuff, and I really like them. I think they're so good. I think that's been one of the good things about lockdown is we have kind of diversified a bit, haven't we? We have started to do things we wouldn't normally do. Okay, thanks Millie, thanks for your input. Anybody else got anything to notice about how these Millie said something very interesting to begin with. She said, and this is what I want you to aspire to, folks. They put quite a lot of information in not very many words, don't they? So they're only 200 words each, but we've got a very good sense of what they're about, these movies. Anybody else want to add something? Thanks, Millie. No? Okay, let me try and guide you here. So have a look on slide 7. Look at the various elements. So the standard format of a movie review is that you say the name of the movie on the left, and you tend to talk about the director, not the actor. Now young journalists often think, James Bond, Daniel Craig. Let's talk about Daniel Craig. But what you really should talk about is the director, because the director on a movie, I'm sure you know this, is the main person. It's his or her creation. That's how they interpret the story. They're the boss, So the director is like the editor of a magazine. He or she decide what goes in, what stays out, who plays the lead, who plays supporting roles. They have the final say on the script. They have the final say on everything. The producer is the person who makes it happen. The producer is the person who sorts out the money. and make sure that the locations are all correct and all of that sort of stuff. But the director, think of the director as the artist, the painter, the sculptor, whatever you want to call, whatever you want to compare them to. So you need the name of the director, and you also need the length as well. So the top one, Onward, is 1 minute 47. I said feature film is 130 and above, or 120 and above. And the other one, Escape from Pretoria, is a very similar length. So make sure when you do a movie review that you include that information. You'll notice underneath there's just, what, 2, 4, 5 words review in a nutshell, encapsulated. More emotional wizardry from Pixar neatly sums up that movie. And also you'll notice, slide 7, I've highlighted a box there which is pretty much in the middle of this little review, and that's the brief description, isn't it? The main characters and the plot. And look how few words the journalist actually uses. Our heroes are 2 teenage elves, voiced by Tom Holland and Chris Pratt, who are propelled on a mad adventure after being given a spell to resurrect for a single day their dead father. So that is the movie. And I read a book last year about a movie producer, a guy called Don, I've forgotten his last name, it'll come to me in a moment, but he was responsible for those great blockbuster movies of the 80s, way before your time, like Top Gun with Tom Cruise and things like that. And and he basically said, if you can't encapsulate the idea of a movie in one sentence, then it's not going to be successful. So you need to be able to sum it up in very, very few words. So brief description, the main characters and the plot right in the middle, and the movie underneath, in the second one, Escape from Pretoria, you'll see there the reviewer's evaluation. So remember, 2 things you have to do in a review: describe and evaluate. So the second example here, it says flat and derivative. Flat, in other words, lifeless. Derivative, meaning it's just the same as all the other movies. Escape from Pretoria is no one's finest hour. The politics are clumsy. The cast's accents are just appalling. It's set in South Africa and they can't do South African accents. And Daniel Radcliffe, who we know and love from Harry Potter, of course, delivers a strangely blank central performance in which he veers from looking determined and looking fearful and determined. So that's kind of, quite a major criticism of dear old Daniel's acting abilities. But the key point here is you can do it in few words. You don't have to use 100 words to do these things. Okay, and the other thing as well, which I highlighted in a previous slide, make sure that you discuss the actors' performances on the left there and link them with their character. For example, James Bond, Daniel Craig, or in this case, Daniel Radcliffe, and whatever the person is that he's playing in this movie. So there's a couple of very short examples. Slide 8, because we're running out of time, we're not going to read through these, but there's 2 more short reviews from The Week magazine. Now you'll notice The Week magazine, what it does something quite different. It takes reviews from other newspapers and magazines and puts them together, so it combines them. You'll notice that the review for The Invisible Man, for example, it includes some thoughts from somebody called Benjamin Lee in The Guardian, the movie director, the movie reviewer in The Guardian, and a bit later on it mentions Robbie Collin in the Daily Telegraph, and it also mentions Richard Brody in the New Yorker. So that's the Week's approach. You can include in your review some other reviews of the movie if you want, but I want it to mostly be your own personal take on that movie. So you can include what other people say about it as well. Slide 9, again, because we don't have a lot of time, there's a longer review there on the left-hand side from the Spectator magazine, which is quite a highbrow magazine. It's a political magazine, typically on the right of the political spectrum. So this is a bit more detailed. Look at the language. It's quite sophisticated language. I mean, it's totally within your capabilities, folks, because don't underestimate yourselves. You're all intelligent people as well. So that's a longer article. Make sure you give it a title. Some people struggled with assessment 1, giving it a title. Don't just call it Film Military Wives. Give it a title. So what the journalist has done here, she's called it Sisters Are Doing It For Themselves. You might recognise that phrase. It's a song from like the 1970s. I'm not going to sing it, but I'm really tempted to. I think you know the one. Sisters are doing it for themselves, etc. That's as close as you're going to get. And the movie is all about military wives. It's about a bunch of women who are married to army officers who decide to go on a mission. So it is females doing something. So you can read that one at your leisure. On the right-hand side, there are loads of film reviews online. We touched on this in the first week. Look for specialist movie magazines, Empire, also culture sections of newspapers. Slide 10. As I said, if you aspire to be a film reviewer, the person who is widely recognised as being the most prominent, high-profile and a very proficient film reviewer is Mark Kermode. You can check out their podcasts on Kermode and Mayo's Film Review on BBC 5 Live, and there's Empire Magazine. Don't forget Empire Magazine. You can access it through Press Reader on the University Library website. So that's what film reviews look like. Hopefully you like a bit of film, everybody. So that's hopefully one of your assessments worked out. The other assessment I suggest, slide 11, is book reviews. Book reviews. Now, in my experience, and I might be completely wrong. Thanks, Millie, you sang it. You didn't let us all hear it, though, Millie. That's the only problem. We'll have to imagine it. So, book reviews. And I don't know you at all, folks. If we were sitting in class in week 1, I would ask you all, if you enjoy reading, put your hands up. And generally what happens every year is about half of the class put their hands up and the other half don't. But I'm sure you've all read a book. You must have read a book at some point in your life. And hopefully, because you want to be journalists and you enjoy writing, you enjoy reading. There's lots of assumptions here, but hopefully they are correct assumptions. Now, what I suggest you do, everybody, I suggest, like I said, I suggest you do one book review and one movie review. And you have until, when's the deadline? It's way down track, isn't it? It's at least 4 weeks away. For assessment too, and I suggest you get a book and start reading it now. Everybody, even people who are not of this class, I recommend that everybody does one movie and one book review for assessment too. The reason being is that your other two options are actually quite difficult to do in lockdown. So the other two options are art and heritage, or sport, games, gaming. Yeah, and that's it, isn't it? So basically there's two other, arts and heritage, sports, games and gaming. Those are actually quite difficult to do in lockdown. There are, as we'll talk about them next week, there might be some options, for example, doing like an online tour of an art gallery. But this time last year, it was the last thing we did. It shows how long COVID has been in place. The last thing we did, virtually to the week, this time last year, is we had a trip to the Tate Modern in London, a class trip. And I encourage students to write a review about their trip to the Tate Modern. We can't do that this year, unfortunately. Like I said, that was the very last thing we did, and we've been locked down ever since. Incredible, 12 months. Anyway, so I recommend book reviews. And if you're struggling for a book, right, so you can do a book that you've read that you know and love. If you do Harry Potter, don't forget, it's going to get a low mark for originality, because any book that's like a real bestseller, you're going to get a low mark for originality. So if you've read some sort of semi-obscure book, maybe in your first language, which might not be English, then that's fantastic for originality. I love books, so I really look forward to reading book reviews. And if you get stuck, if you can't think of a book to read, slide 11 shows you 10 wonderful, viable candidates for this mission. You'll notice that they're all pretty old. The youngest one is 2003. The oldest one is 1922, which is almost 100 years old. I have personally read and recommend Animal Farm, Siddhartha, Hitchhiker's Guide, The Alchemist, The Great Gatsby, Brick Lane. I've read those. Other ones have been recommended by colleagues and students. There's a huge amount of diversity here. There's about half of them are male authors, the other half are female authors. There's authors, different ethnic backgrounds, Monica Ali, Zadie Smith, multicultural, multi-ethnic Londoners. So I'll come on to it in a moment about how to choose a book, but just be aware that all 10 of those, they are top quality. There's a huge amount of diversity. Many of them have won awards, and they are all potentially life-changing. I can guarantee that the ones I've read,
in some small way, or some major way in some cases, changed how I look at the world. So that they are incredible. I would say they're more enriching experiences than Netflix, but maybe that's just me and my generation. Slide 12. So if you want to choose a book, I recommend that you do. Even if you say to yourself, I don't like reading, I recommend you do a book. It will change your life. It will get you a better mark. You are broadening your horizons. So the thing to do, slide 12, read the reviews on Amazon. If you go to Amazon, there are brief reviews of each of these books, or Wikipedia, and they will tell you what the book's about. Don't read the whole thing, because it might prejudice your own opinion of the book. Choose and order a book. Obviously, if you can get access to the library on campus, get it through there. Read it, make notes, and use post-it notes. You know, the little sticky post-it notes to highlight parts of the book which really stand out. But the reason I'm saying all this now is that it will take you a while to read, and ideally you need to read it twice to do a proper review of a book. Okay, so that's book reviews. Let me give you an example, and I'll also tell you what the mission is for Friday. Slide 13, we'll just touch very briefly on this, and then we'll come back to it. So, here, again, this is from the Week magazine. You might recognise the person there, Joanna Lumley. I've actually met her, believe it or not, at a wedding in Marlborough many years ago. Long story. And she's ever so nice, obviously. So she's an actress, comedian, author, activist, and she, in recent years, she's made a bit of a career about doing travel journalism, so typically by train and boat and things like that. So she's very well travelled, very educated, very literate, and what she's been asked to do here by the editor is give very short reviews, about 30 words a book, of 6 books that have that she would classify as her favourites. So what she does in each case, she gives the title, the author, the publisher, brief synopsis of the book, and a very few words of evaluation. So she assesses the book in terms of its general appeal as well. We'll come back to this in 2 minutes. Let me just show you in slide 14 a longer book review. There are loads of examples online, loads and loads and loads of examples online. So if you want to know how to do book reviews, go and find the examples. Use Press Reader, find the culture sections or the art sections of newspapers, Sunday Times, Guardian, etc., and look at how the journalists write book reviews. This is one again from last year, 2020. And this is The Gatekeeper by Kate Fall. Kate used to work in David Cameron's office when he was Prime Minister. So she gives like a factual stroke biographical account of what it's like to work in the higher echelons of British politics. This review is about 1,000 words, so yours is going to be, 4/5 as long as this. So this gives you an example of how to do a long review. And again, think of your readership. This is the New Statesman. It's a relatively well-educated readership. So the subject matter and also the language is going to be relatively sophisticated. But I still think this is where you should be aiming with your own work. Slide 15. A few more writing hints on top of what we've already discussed. As I said, very similar to film reviews, but obviously no images. So your language is all important. How you describe things and people and events and emotions is all important. Can you actually, a good book, think about it, folks, when you read a good book, you can actually see the places and the people, can't you? So when they describe a valley or a mountain or a room or a city or whatever it might be, you can actually see it and sometimes smell it in your mind and hear it, So a good author conjures up all of your senses, and also the people, the characters. Do you like the characters? Are they appealing people? Do they have personality failings or weaknesses or strengths? And I think most characters in novels do. Is the dialogue natural and believable? I half watched a movie last night. I had to turn it off because the dialogue was just bloody awful. They were trying to be all sort of street and gangster, and they just sounded like a load of caricatures. Totally unnatural, so I had to stop watching that movie. And bottom line with a book, really, key phrase, is it a page turner? What that means is you can't wait to finish page 28 so you can move on to page 29 and find out what happened. And I read a heck of a lot, and my goodness, I read a book a couple of weeks ago, 600 pages in 2 days. I mean, I just lay on the sofa and read it for 2 days solid. because it was so engrossing. So you need to be able to convey all these thoughts and feelings about book reviews. Okay, let's move back to Joanna Lumley, slide 16. So this is what I want you to all to do, folks. And this is good on a number of accounts, because one reason it's good is because it shows to me, it explains to me what your own particular preferences are. So slide 16, this is your mission between now and Thursday. And you can work on it on Thursday, but I'm going to give you something else to do Thursday probably as well. So I'd start working on this. Using this list by Joanna Lumley, using this piece as inspiration, write 6 mini reviews of about 30 words each. So I want you to write it in exactly the same format that Joanna's done it. So name of the book, publisher, year, price. I want you to replicate this as much as possible. And what you can do, you can either do 6 books or 6 films or 3 of each. Okay, so I want to, this will, like I say, this will indicate to me what your preferences are. Completely your choice. Don't worry about originality. So if it is Harry Potter, you know, put it in there. But, you know, equally, I'll be interested to see what other weird and wonderful books and movies you've been consuming over the years. And it can be any time. It can be. There was something I did with my mates on Facebook last year. 10 top books of all time. And the rules of this little thing on Facebook said you can go right back in time. So I went back to the first book that ever made an impression on me, which was Charlie and the Chocolate Factory. Remember that one? Which I remember reading age 7. You know, so you can, if you had a seminal moment with a book or a movie when you were a kid, it can go in there. So here's 6, and this is genius idea for another reason, because once you've done it, it's going to give you candidates for assessment too, isn't it? So give me 6, 3 of each, or 6 of one, or 6 of the other, and tell me all about it. But follow Joanna's template here. Slide 17, as always, golden rules: describe, evaluate, and write for your audience. Your audience is still the readers of the student magazine. And slide 18, when you have done it, make sure you proofread it. Remember what we did on accuracy. Again, some people with the assessments I've seen have completely ignored my accuracy guidance, and there are spelling mistakes and capital letters in the wrong place and apostrophes rather random, etc. So proofread it and submit. So the deadline is Thursday in class, and as if by magic, my clock says 2 p.m. precisely. I'm getting quite good after this, after 20 years, aren't I? Okay, any questions, folks?